There is a small timber building at Waiuta that looks as if somebody only stepped away for the afternoon. The grass is close around it. The bush is closer. The road arrives quietly after bends, wet gravel, and west coast forest, so the old town does not appear like a ruin. It appears like a clearing that has been thinking for a long time. If you stand there with an old photograph in your hand, the contradiction is hard to ignore. In the picture, there are people, fences, children, miners, sports days, a hotel, a school, and a town that believed it had a future. In front of you, there are a few buildings, old foundations, tracks, and forests trying to close the space. So the question is not simply why Waiuta became a ghost town. The better question is this: how does a place that produced nearly 750,000 ounces of gold become quiet enough for birds and rain to take the main street back? And there are three smaller questions inside that one. Why was a town built so far up a winding road in the first place? Why did people make ordinary lives beside one of the deepest shafts in New Zealand? And why did the ending come so quickly, when for many years Waiuta looked more permanent than most mining towns ever do? This is not a horror story. It is not about a cursed place or locals warning you away. It is quieter than that. It is the story of a town whose reason for existing was powerful, narrow, and deep underground. My name is Graham. Today we are going to Waiuta on the west coast of the South Island to follow a town from an old object to an empty road, from gold to silence, and from a company settlement to one of New Zealand's best-known ghost towns. Waiuta sits inland from Ikamatua, south of Reefton, in country that does not give itself away quickly. The Department of Conservation describes the place as halfway between Reefton and Greymouth, signposted from State Highway 7, with the turn to Waiuta Road and then Blackwater Road before the road becomes Pierce Road. That approach matters. You do not arrive at Waiuta by accident in the way you might drift into a beach town or a highway service stop. You leave the main road. You follow a smaller road into a landscape shaped by rain, forest, hills, and old mining logic. By the time you arrive, you already understand one cost of living there: distance. But at the start, distance was the bargain people accepted because of what had been found in the rock. On the 9th of November, 1905, a prospecting party found a gold-bearing quartz reef. The date was King Edward VII's birthday, and the reef took the name Birthday Reef. The claim changed hands quickly. A speculator, P.N. Kingswell, bought it for £2,000, proved the reef, and sold the site to Consolidated Goldfields for £30,000. By 1907, Blackwater Mines Limited had been formed as a subsidiary of London-based Consolidated Goldfields. Work began on the Blackwater shaft, and the company originally planned a township some distance from the mine. That is where the story bends for the first time. Companies often like order on paper. Workers usually prefer the shorter walk. Heritage New Zealand records that people chose to live close to the shaft, so the town grew around the mine rather than where the planners had first imagined it. That practical choice shaped Waiuta. It made the mine and the town almost inseparable. The first mine shaft was fully operational by 1908. It was known as the Blackwater Shaft, and it reached 563 meters. Later, the operation expanded with the Blackwater North Claim, renamed Prohibition. The Prohibition shaft took over in 1938 and reached 879 meters. That depth is not just a number for a signboard. It tells you what kind of work Waiuta was built on. This was not a shallow rush where men scraped river gravels and moved on. This was underground quartz reef mining. Miners drilled and blasted gold-bearing quartz from a narrow reef, moved it through tunnels, hauled it to the shaft, raised it to the surface, and sent it for processing. The Department of Conservation says the mine produced nearly 750,000 ounces of gold from 1.5 million tons of quartz. Tohu Whenua calls it the largest gold producer on the west coast. For a place that looks so quiet today, that is the first shock. Waiuta was not a miner camp that faded because it was never important. Waiuta mattered. It mattered enough for roads, shafts, batteries, mills, power plants, shops, houses, and a school. Without the mine, there would have been no town at all. When you look at Waiuta now, it is tempting to begin with emptiness. For the people who lived there, the first truth was routine. Morning would have had the ordinary sounds of a small working town: boots, children, doors, weather, the shift rhythm of the mine, people going to shops, someone walking to school. By the 1930s, Waiuta had grown to around 600 people. NZ History describes a company town for the South Island's largest gold mine, with its own pub, shops, community facilities, and sports clubs. Tohu Whanua says the town had services and facilities that were the envy of much larger towns, helped by the fact that isolation made self-sufficiency necessary. That is one of the strange things about remote towns. Isolation can weaken a place, but it can also make it more complete. Waiuta had to become a place where families could stay. Keep this channel close if old roads interest you. In Waiuta, the road is not just a way in and out. It explains why the town had to build a whole life around one mine. One of the best windows into that life came from a miner named Joseph Divis. Divis was born near Prague in 1885 and came to New Zealand in 1909. He worked as a miner, lived much of his adult life at Waiuta, and photographed the mine, the town, and the people in the 1920s and 1930s. His glass negatives are part of why the town is so visible to us now. The industry below them was precise and unforgiving. A geological paper on the Snowy River Battery describes the Blackwater Reef as a remarkably regular and persistent, steeply dipping quartz lode. It was mined downward over 44 years. The reef could be narrow, averaging around 0.6 of a meter in width, although it varied. That is the second shock of Waiuta. The town depended on something both rich and thin. On paper, the gold made Waiuta strong. In the rock, the town's future lay in a narrow line of quartz. Every house, shop, school day, and sports match sat above a geological fact that had to keep paying. The ore was not simply lifted and turned into gold. It had to be moved, broken, and treated. The Snowy River Battery, built about 900 meters south of the mine, processed the ore in the early years. Later, after investment in the 1930s, a modern ball mill near Prohibition Hill replaced the earlier battery work. The geological paper notes that ore processing left contamination, including arsenic, in the area around the battery. That is the midpoint turn in this story. The old tourist version of a gold town is simple. Gold is found, people arrive, the town booms, the gold runs out, people leave. Waiuta is more complicated. The town was productive for decades. Its decline was a matter of labor, depth, war, damaged bodies, difficult recruitment, and finally a piece of infrastructure failing in the wrong place. Mining at Waiuta was hard underground work. Tohu Whanua describes poor lighting and fumes and says many miners died young from lung damage caused by inhaling quartz dust. That is not an atmospheric detail. It is a human cost built into the prosperity. The town above ground could hold dances, sports days, school lessons, and social events. Below ground, men worked in a narrow, dusty, dangerous world. Both truths belong to Waiuta. In 1931, Waiuta celebrated the 25th anniversary of the establishment of the mine and settlement. NZ History says the Jubilee mattered because most mining towns lasted only a few years. Waiuta appeared to have a future as well as a past. The timing seemed to support that confidence. After difficult years, the rise in the world price of gold made the mine more profitable. Dividends were paid for the next decade. Money went back into the mine. A second shaft was completed. A new ball mill processing plant was built. By 1939, the future looked bright. That sentence is almost cruel now, because we know what came next. The Second World War did not destroy Waiuta in one blow, but it weakened the pattern that kept the town alive. Men left for military service or took jobs elsewhere. NZ history records that between 1939 and 1946, the number of men employed by the company fell from 240 to 113. During the same period, gold output dropped to less than a third of its pre-war amount. After the war, experienced miners were hard to recruit. That is the part of decline that old photographs cannot show easily. A town may still look like itself while the workforce thins out, the buildings stand, the road still reaches the place, and the school may still open, but the economic engine is losing compression. There was no port to reinvent, no broad farming hinterland, no university, and no tourism economy large enough at the time to carry 600 people. The town was built for the mine. If the mine weakened, everything above it weakened too. Then came July 1951. On the 9th of July, there was a major collapse in the original Blackwater shaft. By then, that shaft was being used for ventilation, pumping, and electricity supply. When it failed, the pump stopped and the mine began to flood. On the 17th of July, the London-based board of directors decided to abandon the mine. 8 days. That is what makes Waiuta feel different from a slow decline story. The weakening had been happening for years, but the final decision came fast. There was no alternative employment in the area. Within weeks, many miners and their families had left. Most buildings were dismantled and carted away because building materials were scarce. Within a few months, Waiuta was almost a ghost town. A town does not empty overnight, but sometimes it learns overnight that it cannot remain what it was. The buildings did not disappear because people wanted a picturesque ruin. They disappeared because timber, windows, and iron had value. When a working town stops working, it becomes a store of materials for people who still need to live somewhere else. If you like these quiet corners of New Zealand, stay with me. The next part is where Waiuta stops being only a lost mining town and becomes something rarer, a place saved partly by memory. Today, Waiuta is public conservation land managed by the Department of Conservation as a historic site. Display boards and signposts identify features of the town and its mining relics. Tohu Whenua lists places you can still follow: the Old Town Circuit, the Blackwater Shaft, Waiuta Lodge, bowling greens, tennis court, cottages, the barber shop and police lockup, and the road up to Prohibition Mine. The survival is partial, and that is important. Waiuta is not a complete open-air museum where the past has been preserved. It is a landscape of remains. Roads, foundations, a few buildings, industrial concrete, rusted tanks, tracks through bush, and a rugby field where posts still stand. Heritage New Zealand describes Waiuta as having high aesthetic, archaeological, cultural, historical, social, and technological significance. It notes that the site includes the Old Town, the Blackwater Mine South Shaft and associated features, the Snowy River Battery Site, and the later Prohibition Shaft and Ball Mill area. That range is why Waiuta rewards attention. It is not only a row of cottages, and it is not only a mine. It is a whole system of work and settlement. The town itself sat at the center. To the south, the Snowy River Battery processed ore. To the north, Prohibition Hill carried the later mining operation. Between them were roads, tracks, power, water, and daily movements that had to hold together. Waiuta was not a failure for most of its life. It lasted around 45 years as a gold mining town. It produced gold on a serious scale. The end was sudden, but the life before it was not imaginary. Waiuta is beautiful, and that beauty can mislead you. The bush makes the town feel peaceful now. The old roads soften. The buildings that remain look almost gentle in the weather. But the beauty is not the reason the town emptied. Waiuta existed because of a reef. It grew because capital, labor, machinery, and families gathered around that reef. It emptied when the mine could no longer function and the company chose not to keep fighting the ground. The bush did not kill the town. The bush returned after the town's purpose was taken away. That distinction matters. Rain, forest, steep country, water, and rock are all part of the story. So are shareholders, shafts, pumps, electricity, war, lung disease, building materials, and decisions made far from the West Coast. The final strong fact is the one I keep coming back to. The collapse that ended Waiuta was in the original Blackwater shaft, which by then was not simply an old hole in the ground. It was part of the mine's working body, used for ventilation, pumping, and electricity supply. When it failed, the mine lost more than access. It lost the systems that kept deep underground work possible. That is why one failure could undo so much. In a remote mining town, infrastructure is not background, it is life support. You can still visit Waiuta, and you should treat it as a real place rather than a spooky backdrop. It is a heritage site, a conservation area, and a memory held by former residents, descendants, friends of Waiuta, DOC, and historians. Walk slowly. Notice the distance. Notice how close the bush stands. Notice the way a road can still remember a town. The remaining buildings are not props, they are survivors. Waiuta answers the opening question in a plain way. A town that produced nearly 750,000 ounces of gold became quiet because gold alone was not enough. It needed shafts that held, pumps that ran, miners who could be recruited, bodies that could bear the dust, a company willing to invest, and families willing to stay at the end of a winding road. For decades, all of those things lined up well enough. Then they did not. The old timber building remains. The road remains. The bush waits without hurry. The photographs remain too, and perhaps they are the most generous ruins of all, because they let Waiuta be more than empty. If you have been to Waiuta, or if your family has a West Coast mining story, leave the place name in the comments. Local memory often notices what official signs cannot fit. Next time, we may follow another road where the map starts telling a different story. I am Graham. Old maps have a habit of reminding us that places do not disappear all at once. Look after yourself, and I will see you on the next road.